I never thought I'd be the kind of guy whose life turned into a tabloid headline. But here I am, staring at the echo of my dreams, shattered like a dropped champagne flute on marble. My name is Tyler Reynolds, and I'd always believed in fairy tale endings. I was the kind of person who planned everything right down to the color of the confetti that would fall on our first dance. But no one plans for betrayal. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, the son of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. My parents taught me that love was about loyalty, about weathering storms together. So when I met Julia, my fiancée, I thought I'd finally found the kind of love that lasts forever. She was warm, brilliant, and had this laugh that lit up every room. And then there was Mark, my best friend since middle school. He was the guy I trusted to stand beside me, not just at the altar, but through every twist and turn of life. For months, I'd been neck-deep in wedding plans. Julia and I had chosen a rustic vineyard for the ceremony. She wanted white peonies, so I found the perfect florist. She wanted a 5-piece jazz band done. And Mark was my best man, of course. We'd laughed about the old days over bourbon and cigars, talked about how he'd keep me sane on the big day. He was my brother in everything but blood. But it turned out he was something else entirely. I should have seen it coming, I guess. The late-night texts between them, the way they shared these little smiles when they thought I wasn't looking. But I didn't want to see it. I was too busy imagining the future, our house filled with kids. Laughter, the promise of forever. Then came the night before the wedding. Julia said she was staying at her sister's to get some rest. Mark was supposed to crash at my place, so we could rehearse our speech and maybe sneak in one last drink. But he never showed up. My calls went straight to voicemail. The next morning I woke up to a single text from Julia. "I'm so sorry, Tyler. I can't do this." My hands were shaking as I read those words, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. I called her again and again. I called Mark, desperate for him to explain, to tell me it was some sick misunderstanding. But he didn't pick up either. It was like the two people I loved most had vanished overnight. I was left standing there, tuxedo pressed, vows memorized. A man at the altar with no bride. I never saw it coming, and yet in that moment, it felt like I'd always known. I felt everything at once: grief, rage, betrayal. It was as if the floor had been ripped out from under me, and I was free-falling into a void, didn't know how to climb out of. The days after that morning blurred into a haze of disbelief. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Julia in her white dress, Mark's hand resting on my shoulder. Two ghosts, haunting every corner of my mind. My phone became a lifeline, vibrating with messages of concern from friends and family. But not a word from the two people who mattered most. I spent hours pacing my apartment, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe Julia had cold feet. Maybe Mark was helping her figure it out, the way he always had my back. Maybe it wasn't what it seemed. But the silence was deafening, and the longer it stretched, the more the doubts crept in. I replayed every conversation, every glance, searching for cracks I'd ignored. There was that night 3 weeks before the wedding when Julia and Mark had insisted on finalizing the seating chart together while I was stuck at work. She'd texted me later. Mark was a huge help. At the time, I'd been grateful. Now it felt like a clue I'd missed. I started combing through my photos, hunting for some hint, some sign. My heart sank when I found a shot from the tasting at the vineyard. Julia was smiling at Mark, her hand resting on his arm in a way that made my stomach turn. It looked so natural, so intimate. My fingers hovered over the image, wanting to believe it was just an accident of the camera. Us. But deep down, something twisted inside me. The night before the wedding replayed in my head, like a bad movie. Julia's voice on the phone, too sweet to calm, telling me she needed space to think. Mark's sudden silence, no explanation, no apology. My mind screamed for answers, but all I got was that text from Julia, final, cowardly exit. I tried calling Mark's apartment, but no one answered. I went by his place, knocked until my knuckles were raw. The neighbors said they hadn't seen him. Julia's sister claimed she didn't know where Julia was. It was like they'd been swallowed whole by the earth. Days turned into weeks, and I went from heartbroken to obsessed. I kept thinking, if I could just find out why, maybe I could put it to rest. I started with Mark's social media. He hadn't posted since the night of my bachelor party, a week before the wedding. Julia's profiles were wiped clean. No posts, no photos. It's just a digital silence that mirrored the real one. But then I remembered something. Julia had always loved those mood board apps. She'd saved dozens of them, obsessing over color palettes and flower arrangements. So I checked them, half expecting to find nothing. But there it was, an account still logged in on my computer. And when I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Hidden among images of bouquets and wedding dresses were pictures of hotel rooms, luxury suites I didn't recognize. There were screenshots of flight confirmations, 2 tickets to Paris, leaving the night before our wedding. My pulse pounded in my ears as I realized the truth wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was real. They'd planned this. They'd left me standing there while they jetted off together to the city of love. My hands shook as I scrolled, each new discovery cutting deeper than the last. Messages between them, little jokes and flirty exchanges. I couldn't read them all. It felt like I was going to be sick. But one line burned itself into my mind. Can't wait to be alone with you. This is our fresh start. Our fresh start. My mind twisted around those words like barbed wire. I wanted to scream, to smash my computer against the wall. Instead, I just sat there, numb, staring at the screen until my eyes blurred. The next morning, I woke up with a single thought pulsing through me. I needed to know everything. I needed to see it all laid out in black and white. I started digging through credit card statements, old receipts, anything that might fill in the gaps. And slowly, a timeline emerged. Fancy dinners billed to my card, spa days, Julia claimed, were for stress relief, even hotel bookings months before our wedding date. All paid for by me, the unwitting host of their little affair. But as much as I hated it, a small part of me still clung to the hope that there was some other explanation, that maybe Mark would show up at my door, eyes full of regret, and tell me it was all a terrible mistake, that Julia would say she'd been confused, that she'd come back. I was caught in this hellish dance between suspicion and hope, every day feeling like a new betrayal. I knew the truth was there, just out of reach, and the not knowing was tearing me apart. I felt like I was losing my mind, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not without answers. Not without a fight. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, but I could think, and I could plan. The betrayal had cracked something open in me, something sharp and cold and relentless. I was done with hope. I needed the truth, and I needed to take back some control of my life. I started piecing together every detail I could find, methodically and carefully. I kept a notebook, every page filled with dates, receipts, scraps of memory. Julia and Mark had left me with nothing but questions, but the answers were hiding in plain sight. I was going to find them. First, I dug through my shared bank account with Julia. She'd had access to everything, every line of credit, every penny I'd saved for our life together, and there it was. Dozens of charges that didn't make sense. Spa packages in her name but booked for 2, room service bills from luxury hotels downtown. At first I told myself they were coincidences, but then I found the overlapping dates. The same addresses, the same goddamn hotel rooms. Mark had once joked were too fancy for us. It wasn't just dinners or trips. It was a pattern, a roadmap of betrayal written in dollar signs and hotel keys. My heart felt like it was cracking in my chest, but I forced myself to keep going. I wasn't going to let them blindside me again. I started calling the hotels, pretending to confirm reservations for upcoming stays. My voice was calm, polite, professional. They didn't know I was the man who'd been left at the altar. They didn't need to. Room numbers, dates, confirmations. It all fell into place. Next, I went to Julia's sister, who'd claimed not to know anything. I didn't accuse Hi, just asked questions. Casual, friendly. She cracked faster than I expected. She admitted Julia had been talking about Paris for months, even before the wedding was finalized. She thought Julia was just nervous that Mark was helping her figure things out. My stomach turned at the way she tried to soften it, to make betrayal sound like concern. But I didn't argue. I just listened, filing away every word. The final nail came from an unexpected place. Mark had a private email account, one he'd once used for our bachelor party planning, I remembered. The password he'd let slip when we were drunk one night? On a whim, I tried it. My hand shook as I typed in the address, half sure it wouldn't work, but it did. What I found in there was everything. Emails back and forth with Julia, messages that were like knives in my gut. They'd been planning this for months, how to cover their tracks, how to make sure I wouldn't find out until it was too late. One message stood out. Julia's words, simple and cold. Once the wedding's done, it's clean. He won't know until we're gone. I read it over and over, the words searing into me like a brand. The woman I thought I'd spend my life with, the man I'd trusted. More than anyone talking about me like I was an obstacle. Mark. I closed the laptop, my breath ragged in my chest. I wanted to destroy something, to scream until my voice was gone. But instead, I forced myself to sit still, to breathe. I had. Proof, now real. Undeniable proof. And with that came a strange sort of calm. I wasn't going to let them walk away without consequences. They'd stolen my heart, my trust, my future. But they wouldn't steal my dignity. I started gathering everything together, screenshots of the emails, copies of the receipts, every line of evidence that showed how they'd used me. I backed it all up in a folder on my computer labeled simply, Truth. It was the one thing I still had control over, but I didn't stop there. I reached out to a friend who worked in event planning, someone who'd helped coordinate the wedding. I told her everything. At first she was shocked, but then she nodded, her face hardening. "You've got to protect yourself," she said. "They can't just walk away like this." I'd paid for everything, every flower, every plate of food, every bottle of champagne, and the cancellation fees. They were all on me too. I realized then how deep the betrayal went, not just emotional, but financial. They'd left me too, carry the weight of the entire wedding. That's when the idea started to form. If they thought they could run off into the sunset without paying for what they'd done, they were wrong. I wasn't going to scream or beg or fight. I was going to be smart. I was going to make sure they knew exactly what they owed me. Every night, I'd sit at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, my notebook in front of me. I'd list out every expense, every deposit, every bit of debt they'd left me with. As I did, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just the guy who got left behind anymore. I was someone who was taking back control. The pain was still there, of course. It always would be. But it was no longer the pain of a victim. It was the resolve of a man who'd been broken and was now putting himself back together piece by piece, dollar by dollar, truth by truth. I was done being blindsided, done being the fool. I was ready, more than ready, to make them face what they'd done. It was a cold Friday morning when I decided I was done waiting, done with the hollow apologies I'd never hear, the explanations that wouldn't come. I was done being the man left behind, the man people pitied. It was time for me to stand up and show them exactly who they'd underestimated. I dressed carefully that day's lax, a button-down shirt, the same cologne I'd worn on what should have been my wedding day. It felt like armor, a reminder of the man I still was beneath the heartbreak. I called the vineyard first, the site of the wedding that never happened, and explained the situation. They were sympathetic, but firm. The final invoice was due, no matter what had happened. And so were the caterers, the band, the photographer, tens of thousands of dollars for a day that would never be. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Mark. The phone rang twice, and he picked up, his voice a cautious hello. I could hear the tension there, the way his breath caught. He knew. "Of course he knew, Tyler," he said, as if we were still friends, as if we still had anything left to salvage. "Listen, I cut in, my voice ice. "I don't want your excuses. I just want what's owed."
Right!
I imagined him sitting wherever he was, Julia by his side, both of them caught in the trap of their own making. "You think you can just vanish and leave me with the bill? With all of it?" I said, my tone low, measured. "I've got every receipt, Mark. Every hotel room, every dinner, every lie you two dressed up as love. And guess who paid for it all?" "Me." He stammered something, but I didn't care. My voice rose, the fury I'd held back for weeks finally breaking free. "You stole my future. You stole my money. But you're not going to steal my dignity. I've spoken to the wedding planners, the vendors, the venue. Everything is in my name, and legally, that makes it my debt. But morally, it's yours." He tried to talk over me, his voice pleading, but I wasn't done. I wanted him to feel every ounce of the betrayal he'd laid at my feet. "I'm sending you an itemized bill," I said, my words sharp as glass. "Every single expense from the wedding you helped destroy. You and Julia can figure out how to split it, but you're going to pay me back, every last dollar." I hung up before he could answer, my hand shaking. But it wasn't fear this time. It was something fierce and alive inside me. I'd stopped hoping for apologies. I wanted justice. That afternoon, I drafted the invoice. It felt almost surreal, listing out every charge, the deposit on the venue, the catering, the flowers, the band, the photographer. The total was staggering, a testament to the dream that had turned into a nightmare. And then I added the costs. I'd found in their secret hotel stays, the plane tickets to Paris, every luxury they'd stolen while they tore me apart. Sent it in an email with the subject line, "Your debt." No explanation, no plea. Just the cold truth of what they owed. And then I did one more thing. I posted my story online, not in some fit of revenge, but as a way to reclaim my own narrative. I didn't name names, didn't point fingers directly, but I told the story of the man who paid for a wedding he never had, whose fiancé and best man ran away together and left him to clean up the mess. It wasn't petty, it was catharsis. And it went viral. People reached out, strangers who'd been betrayed in their own ways. They shared my story, their voices weaving into mine, until it was no longer just my heartbreak. It was a testament to every person who'd ever been left to pick up the pieces. The final blow came when I received a call from Julia. Her voice was small, apologetic. "Tyler, please," she said, "can't we talk about this?" I took a breath, the memory of her betrayal cutting through me like a knife. "There's nothing left to talk about, Julia," I said. "You and Mark chose each other. You can choose to do the right thing and pay me back." She tried to say more, but I ended the call. I was done, giving her pieces of myself she didn't deserve. In the days that followed, I watched as the invoice made its way into their world. I knew they'd gotten it. Mark's email reply was brief, a single line. "We'll pay it." No apology, no excuses. Just the weight of the debt they'd created. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. I wasn't whole, not yet. But I'd taken my first step back to myself. I'd turned my heartbreak into something they couldn't ignore, something they had to answer for. They thought they could steal my future and leave me in the ashes. But I wasn't their victim anymore. I was my own man standing on the wreckage. They'd made, and I was making sure they'd paid for every last stone in the days that followed. The fallout was immediate and unflinching. Word of the invoice and the story that had gone viral spread like wildfire. Friends who had once admired Mark's easy smile and Julia's warm charm now saw them in a different light. The whispers turned into full-throated conversations. People wanted to know how they could have done something so cold, so calculating. Mark tried to lie low, but the truth was out. His carefully cultivated image as the loyal friend was in shambles. I heard from a mutual friend that he'd been forced to move out of the apartment he shared with Julia. Apparently, not even betrayal can survive the weight of public scorn. Their relationship, which had started in secret and stolen moments, began to crack under the pressure of everyone else's eyes. What they thought was their private love story was now exposed. Every dirty secret laid bare for the world to see. Julia, too, faced her share of consequences. Her family was stunned. Her mother called me, voice heavy with shame and apology. I didn't have the heart to tell her it wasn't her burden to carry. Julia's silence was deafening. She didn't try to defend herself anymore. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. As for the debt, they paid it slowly in installments, but they paid. Each payment that arrived in my account felt like a small victory, quiet affirmation that I wasn't just the abandoned groom. I was a man who had faced the worst and refused to be broken by it. But even as the money came in and the whispers grew louder around them, ache inside me didn't disappear overnight. There were nights when I still woke up expecting to find Julia curled beside me, her hair spread across my pillow. There were days when I missed Mark's laughter, how it had once been the backdrop to so many of my best memories. Grief, I learned, doesn't vanish just because you've won a battle. It softens at the edges, but the core of it still stings. Yet there was something new in me, too. Something stronger. A sense of closure that wasn't about forgetting, but about owning my story. I'd taken the pain and turned it into something real. Something that forced them to look me in the eye and see what they'd done. I wasn't naive enough to think I'd never think of them again. But I was done letting their choices define me. I was done letting their betrayal be the last word in my story. They thought they could write the ending for me, that I'd be the man who was left behind, broken and silent. But I wasn't that man anymore. I was the one who stood up, faced the truth, and made them see me not as a victim, but as the one who refused to be erased. Life has a way of moving on, even when you're not sure you're ready. In the weeks and months after I sent that final invoice, I found myself learning how to breathe again, to live in a world where everything I'd planned had been swept away. The first step was the hardest to accept, thing that the future I'd imagined was gone. But somewhere in the quiet after the storm, I found something I didn't expect. The chance to start fresh. I moved out of the apartment that held too many memories. Too many echoes of a life that no longer existed. One found a small place closer. To the river, a spot where I could hear the water at night and feel the breeze through my windows. It was mine alone, no shared closets or half-empty drawers, no ghosts of what should have been. Just me and the possibility of something new. I went back to my work with a focus I'd lost in the chaos of planning a wedding and a life that never happened. My clients didn't know the details, but they could see the difference in me. I wasn't just going through the motions. I was building something that was mine, brick by brick, hour by hour. There was something healing in that, something steady and sure. Some nights, I'd find myself remembering the laughter, the shared secrets with Mark. The quiet mornings with Julia. Those memories didn't hurt the way they used to. They felt like pages in an old book, finished, turned, and set aside. I didn't need to tear them out or pretend they hadn't happened. They were part of my story, but they didn't get to be the whole story anymore. I started seeing friends again. People I'd pushed away in the confusion and shame of it all. We'd meet for drinks or go hiking in the hills just outside the city. I laughed more than I had in months, and with every laugh, I felt a little bit lighter. There was life beyond betrayal, and it was brighter than I'd dared to hope. Most of all, I found a kind of strength in myself I didn't know I had. I'd always thought of myself as the steady one, the guy who planned everything down to the last detail. But when everything fell apart, I learned how to stand up and fight back, not with fists or fury, but with a calm, quiet resolve that said, "You don't get to decide who I am." I learned that closure isn't about erasing the past. It's about accepting it and finding a way forward. It's about knowing that the scars you carry don't have to define you, and that sometimes the worst betrayals can lead you to the truest parts of yourself. So I took the pieces of what was left, my work, my friends, the small apartment by the river, and I built something new, something honest, something that was mine, and only mine. I don't know if Julia and Mark are still together. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm not the man they tried to leave behind. I'm stronger now, clearer, more at peace than I've ever been. They thought they could steal my story and write the ending themselves. But the ending was never theirs to write. It was mine, and I chose to make it something worth living in the end. What I learned was this: betrayal doesn't get the final word. no matter how deep it cuts. It might leave you gasping, might turn your world upside down, but it can't take away the core of who you are unless you let it. I chose not to let it. I realized that resilience isn't about never falling. It's about getting up again and again, even when your knees are bloody and your heart feels hollow. It's about looking at the mess and deciding to clean it up, not because it's fair, but because you deserve the chance to start again. Justice, in its truest form, is about taking back what's yours, your voice, your dignity, your story. I think about how easy it would have been to stay angry forever, to let the bitterness seep in and poison everything I touched. But I didn't want that to be the legacy of what they did to me. I wanted the legacy to be strength, not spite. Growth, not ruin. And that's the thing about heartbreak, it strips you down, burns away the illusions, and shows you what really matters. You learn who you are in the quiet after the fire. You learn what you're made of. And sometimes, you find out that you're stronger than you ever imagined. So if there's one thing I'd say to anyone standing where I stood, it's this. You are not what they did to you. You are not the betrayal, or the lies, or the loss. You are what comes after the rebuilding, the reclaiming, the quiet determination to live life on your own terms. Mark and Julia took a piece of my heart, but they didn't take all of me. And that's the lesson I carry forward. No one else gets to define your worth. No one else gets to write your ending. I'm not the man who was left behind. I'm the man who stood back up and decided that my story wasn't over. In that choice, I found my freedom and, maybe one day, a new beginning.